first lance of fire fell from orbit at exactly the moment the bands began to play. General Vethek Vas-Karan of the Council's 16th Fleet was standing on the observation balcony of his flagship, the heavy carrier Heart of Arusa, watching 300 warships hold dress formation above the asteroid forge of Balarn 6. When the line in the sky above the parade went white, he had time to think it was a malfunction in his eyepiece. Then the white widened, and the leading battleship of the 8th Squadron, the Sun Promise, 4 kilometers of polished ceremonial hull, opened down its long axis like a fruit and was simply not there anymore. The shock wave reached the carrier 9 seconds later and made the deck plates ring like struck bells. Vethek's secondary lung pulled tight against his ribs. He had 2 lungs, as did all Russian high castes, and they did not agree with each other in moments of fear. The first wanted to bark orders. The second wanted to flee. He sided by ancient custom with the first. Defensive screen, he said. Now, his adjutant, a young flight captain named Maruyel, was already moving. The ceremonial music cut off mid-phrase, replaced by the long mournful tones of Council General Alarm. Across the parade formation, 300 ships broke ranks like a flock of startled birds. The trouble was that a ceremonial formation had no defensive geometry. The ships were arranged for the eye of an admiral, not the path of incoming fire. The second strike came 40 seconds after the first. It did not come from orbit. It came down through the upper atmosphere of Balarn 6 in a column of heat and noise that made the optical sensors stagger. Vethek's tactical feed lit with 1,200 discrete signatures, then 1,600, then more. And then his analysts gave up trying to count them and reported only mass. The mass that fell through the cloud deck and into the formation of the 16th Fleet was alive. He had been a soldier for 312 standard years. He had stood in the breach against the Hroka Raiders, the lattice breakers of Tannehill, the secession fleets at Tessering. He thought he had seen every kind of war. He had not seen this. They came in long, not in a single drop. They came in a sliding, banking, 3-dimensional river that occupied a volume of sky larger than most planetary cities. They were enormous, and they were many. He registered scaled hides black as the spaces between stars, bone crests the height of an admiral's tower, wingspans his sensors measured in kilometers, and refused to trust. The lead bodies in the column did not waste time. They struck the 8th Squadron the way a hand struck a glass. The ceremonial battleships, designed for parade and for the slow logical war of broadsides at 400 kilometers, broke apart along their seams. Heat plumes flared from torn reactor cores. Coilgun batteries opened fire and the slugs vanished into hide as if into water. The energy lances of the Council, which could core a continent over an hour, scored long bright lines along scale and did not penetrate. "Helmsman," Vethek said. His own voice sounded thin in his ears. "Translate us, anywhere." "Now," General Yell said. "The gates will not establish under this much mass shadow." Then a short jump. "A blind jump now, Captain." The carrier lurched. Vethek felt the cold pressure of a translation field forming around the hull, the brief sickening pull as space folded, the relief as it folded back. The Heart of Arusa came out 3 light minutes from where it had been, gun deep in the cold gas of an outer ring system. The viewport, when its filters cleared, showed only the slow tumble of frozen rock. He stood very still and listened to his secondary lung and counted, in his head, the names of every captain whose ship had been in the parade. He stopped counting at 61. "Send to Council Central," he said. He kept his voice level. 16th engaged at Balarn 6. Aggressor identified as multiple high-mass aerial bioforms. Casualties severe. Request immediate reinforcement and atmospheric warfare doctrine. Coordinates to follow. Maruyel did not move at first. Her white throat had gone pale at its base. She was very young. She had never seen the upper fleet caste die before. "Captain," Vethek said. More gently, the message. She nodded. She turned to her station. Across the bridge, 312 years of soldiering pressed down on Vethek Vas-Karan's shoulders, and he allowed himself a single moment of admission. He had no doctrine for this. He had no weapon for this. He had no precedent in the long, careful libraries of the Council's wars for what he had just seen come out of the cloud deck of Balarn 6. The Council had a name for the species it had just lost the bulk of a fleet to. The name was old, and it sat in folklore and children's tales, and no living Council admiral had ever expected to use it in a tactical report. He used it anyway. "Aggressors are dragons," he said. "I repeat, dragons. May the gate keep us." His staff did not laugh. That was, he noted, the worst part. The Heart of Arusa pulled itself together over the next 8 hours. Damage control teams sealed the breaches the shockwave had opened in the lower, hangars. The medical decks did their grim arithmetic. Out of 300 ships at the parade, the carrier could confirm 11 survivors had translated cleanly away. 8 more were on emergency drift. The rest were gone. The senior staff assembled in the strategy chamber at ship noon. Vithek did not sit. He stood at the head of the long obsidian table and looked at the faces of the officers who had lived. Most of them had not yet processed what they had seen. He understood. He had not either. "We will not pretend," he said, "that we know what we are fighting." He waited for the murmurs to die. "We will pretend, however, that we are still a council fleet. We will behave with discipline. We will gather what intelligence exists, and we will give the council something useful before we engage again." His chief intelligence officer, a Cassira named Doruvel, lifted one of her thin hands. "General, if I may, there is intelligence. Speak." "I have been pulling civilian and frontier traffic across the rim for the last 6 hours. The pattern began before our parade. Dragons have been emerging from the outer dark in scattered flights for at least a standard year. There have been incidents, fishing convoys lost, frontier farms burned, freight lines reporting losses they were too embarrassed to file. Several of the affected systems are human." The word landed on the obsidian table and sat there. "Humans," Vethek said. "Yes, General." He turned to the wall display. The council star map opened, and the human-claimed worlds were marked in their thin pale ring along the underside of explored space. The council did not seat humans. The council had granted humanity an observer status, a trade corridor, and the right to a planetary anthem. The council had not granted them more because they were a young species, raw, intemperate, and underdeveloped in the philosophies of long war. They had been admitted to the corridor only because the lattice breakers of Tannehill had once needed killing, and the humans had killed them, in a manner that the council had quietly logged and quietly tried not to think about again. Vethek had read those logs once. They had been unpleasant reading. "Have the humans been engaging the bioforms?" he asked. Doruvel hesitated. "The human convoy traffic in the affected sectors shows weapon discharge signatures consistent with sustained engagement, General. We have intercepted communication fragments referring to big lizards, wing wolves, and a longer phrase translated as fire from the up. They appear to have been fighting these things in a small and disorganized way for months, and they did not report it. They are not seated, General. They do not report to us." Vethek's secondary lung tightened. The first wanted to deride humans for hoarding intelligence the council could have used. The second pointed out dryly that the council had given humans no reason to share it. He let neither lung speak. "Find me a human," he said. Doruvel inclined her head. "There is a human convoy 2 systems toward galactic north. Freightwing, light escort. The senior pilot is named, I am rendering the syllables as Audra Kestrel. Hail her, politely." Audra Kestrel did not hail back politely. The human ship that answered the heart of Arusa's signal at first watch the next morning was a beat-down freighter whose hull bore the scars of at least 3 different recent fires. Its registered name was the Long Patience. It came in at flank burn, slewed sideways into approach orbit beside the carrier, and held station at uncomfortably close range. Then a face filled the bridge comm screen. She was human in the unmistakable way. Pale skin under the duty lights, dark hair cut short, a scar that ran from her cheekbone into her hair. She wore the kind of patched flight jacket that council officers were not permitted to wear off duty, and she had a cup of something steaming in her left hand. 16th, she said. "You called?" "I am General Vithek Voskaren of the Council's 16th Fleet," he said. I know who you are, General. Your parade got eaten. The whole rim heard. What do you want?" The strategy chamber went very still. Vethek did not let himself bristle. The first lung wanted to. The second wanted to take notes. "I want," he said carefully, "to talk about what ate it." Audra Kestrel sipped from her cup. Her eyes, small, fixed, unreadable in the human way, held his gaze through the comm. "All right," she said. "Coffee on my deck, 20 minutes. Bring whoever's smart. Leave the dress uniforms." She closed the channel. Doruvel said quietly, "General Protocol." "Protocol is dead at Bellarn 6, Vithek said. "Prepare a shuttle." He went himself with Doruvel in a single-armed escort. He did not wear dress. He wore a working coat. The shuttle ride was 8 minutes, and he spent them looking at the Long Patience's hull and counting the patches. He counted 43 before the docking clamps caught. The human captain met them in a hangar that smelled of machine oil and burnt coffee. She had 3 of her crew with her, a thick-shouldered man with a missing finger, a woman with a welding scar across her jaw, and a small, wiry person of indeterminate gender whose flight suit had patches in 3 languages Vethek could read. Behind them, The hangar was full of objects he did not at first recognize: half-disassembled cargo drones, long racks of crude tube launchers, stacks of cylinders painted with white symbols that he eventually realized were fuel-air explosive charges of a kind the Council had outlawed 2 centuries ago. She offered him coffee. He did not drink coffee. He took the cup anyway. "You've been fighting them," he said. 11 months, said Audra Kestrel. "Lost 4 ships, killed 2 of them, we think. Two confirmed kills, several wounded. Hard to tell with these things. They scale up, scale down, they don't bleed the way ours do. The big ones are smarter than the little ones by a lot. The biggest one we ever saw, we didn't engage. She came down over the Talmir corridor, and she looked at us. I am telling you, General, she looked at us, and then she left, and we left, and that was the right call." "What do you call her? Stormcoil?" The freighter pilot started it. "I don't know if it means anything to her." He filed the name. Doruvel was already recording. "You did not report this to the Council," he said. "No. Why not?" Audra Kestrel looked at him for a long moment. He had the impression again of being read. Humans, he thought, did that. It was one of the things in the Tannehill logs. "Because," she said, "we have asked the Council for help twice in 11 months. Once on official channels, once on personal favor through a Glani trading house. Both times we were told that observer status species are expected to manage their own frontier security. So we managed." She set her coffee down. "And now your fleet got eaten and you want to talk to the humans. All right, we'll talk. But understand something, General. We have lost crews on these things. We have lost friends. We have buried people in vacuum, and we have written their names on the inside of cargo bay doors, and we have kept flying because we had to keep flying. The Council didn't help us. So when I tell you what works, you are going to listen, and you are not going to tell me how it should be done by the long war philosophies. Are we clear?" The first lung wanted to remind her that he was a general of the Council, and she was a freight captain of an unseeded species. The second lung said quite firmly that the first lung needed to shut up. "We are clear, Captain Kestrel," Vethek said. She nodded once. "Good. Sit down. Let me show you." What she showed him took the rest of the afternoon and into the night. The humans had been keeping careful notes. They had names for the body parts they had observed. They had ranges at which they had seen wings beat and ranges at which they had seen wings furl. They had inferred breath capacity from kill data. A dragon, they had learned, could not sustain a continuous flame at full output for more than about 11 seconds before it had to draw breath. They had learned that the membrane behind the third throat plate was thin enough to be punctured by a high-velocity rod, provided the rod was angled upward and entered the mouth at the moment the dragon roared. They had learned that the eyes were partially shielded by a nictitating film that could be temporarily blinded by a high-spectrum strobe at a particular frequency. They had learned, in other words, what the Council had not bothered to learn. Vethek sat at her cluttered table and read it all, and he found to his irritation that his contempt for humans was undergoing an unpleasant restructuring. "You will share all of this with the Council," he said at last. "I will share it with you," Audra Kestrel said, "and what you do with it is your business. The Council is not my friend." He let that pass. There was, he thought, an argument to be had there. It was not the argument to have now. "We will engage them again," he said, "soon. I would like your wing to fly with my fleet." She raised an eyebrow. The gesture was minor. The information it conveyed was vast. "My wing is 6 freighters and 1 armed cutter," she said. "We are not a Council line element. I am aware. You want us as bait. I want you as the hammer to my anvil. If your notes are correct." She held his gaze again. Outside the hangar viewport, the gas of the outer ring caught a thin trace of distant starlight. Then she nodded. "Fine," she said. "But we fly our way. Low approach, cluster cooks at the throat, drones as decoys, and when I say break, your line breaks. Are we still clear, General?" "We are clear, Captain." She offered her hand in the human way. He took it. Her grip was firm and warm and quite small. He noticed distantly that his secondary lung had unclenched for the first time since the parade. They engaged the dragons 3 days later in the rings of a brown dwarf called Surin. Vethek had brought everything he could call to the front: 11 Council-line ships, 2 cruiser squadrons hastily redeployed from the Tessering border, a half-wing of Glani interceptors lent on personal favor, and Audra Kestrel's 6 freighters with their armed cutter. The plan was simple, in the way that Audra's plans tended to be simple. The line ships would form a slow, inviting screen at high altitude in the ring plane, broadcasting hard. The dragons, drawn by the broadcast, would come up out of the gas to strike. Audra's wing would be running silent, low, hidden in the ring debris, and would come in under the dragons as they climbed. It worked for the first 6 minutes. The dragons came up out of the ring exactly as Audra had said they would. 6 of them, then 9, then 13. They were smaller than the parade killers. Vethek estimated wingspans in the hundreds of meters rather than the kilometers. But the council line was thinner, and the smaller dragons were faster. They came up at the screen ships in a sliding spiral that Vethek's tactical officers spent the first 2 minutes trying to interpret as some form of pre-programmed military maneuver. By the 3rd minute, watching the dragons split smoothly into 2 arcs to flank the council line, Vethek understood that it was not pre-programmed. It was thinking. The dragons were thinking together, the way a school of fish thinks together, the way a wolf pack thinks together, and that was a worse thing to fight than any kind of doctrine. Audra's wing came up under them at minute 6. They came up silent. The dragons did not see them until they were already inside the firing arc. Then the human freighters cooked off their throat charges, long thin cylinders that lit a fierce white as they entered the dragon mouths and bloomed and ruptured. 3 dragons fell out of the sky in the first volley. 2 more came apart in midair when their breath bladders cooked off. The remaining 8 dragons did not flee. They turned. What Vethek saw on his tactical feed in the next 90 seconds would stay with him for the rest of his career. The dragons broke their flank arc and folded inward on Audra's wing the way a fist closed on a held coin. The long patience took a flame strike that went on for 9 of Audra's catalogued 11 seconds and survived only because the hull was crusted with the patches of 40 prior fires. The freighter Hark and Holler did not survive. Its captain, Vethek would later learn the name was Ren Polo, and would memorize it, pulled his ship into a deliberate ram, cooked off every charge in his cargo bay simultaneously, and detonated inside the throat of the largest dragon in the engagement. The blast traveled down the dragon's gullet, opened its chest cavity along its sternum, and left a kilometer of falling meat in the upper rings. 3 of the surviving dragons broke and dived. 2 stayed. They were, Vethek thought, the ones that had been thinking hardest. They were not done. It was at this point that the line ships of the council remembered what they were for. Vethek had been holding the heart of Arusa and her sister carriers at high screen, broadcasting the bait signal, waiting for Audra's signal to break and reposition. He did not wait for it. He gave the order himself. All line elements, he said, drive forward. Engage closest dragon at point blank. Fire at the throat membrane on its next roar. The heart of Arusa surged. Her sister carriers came alongside. The council had never been built for close work, but the council had been built. The line ships closed the distance to the nearest dragon in 11 seconds. The dragon, seeing them come, opened its jaws to roar. 3 energy lances entered its mouth at once. It came apart from the inside. The other surviving dragon read the math. It turned and dove for the ring debris and was lost in the gas inside a minute. The engagement was over. The council had killed 3 dragons. The humans had killed 3 more. And the cost was the Hark and Holler, the lives of 6 human crew, and 1 council destroyer that had taken a flank strike during the close engagement and broken in half. Vethek stood in his strategy chamber and made his secondary lung be still and put through a call to the long patience. Audra Kestrel answered. Her face was streaked with sweat and something darker. There was a thin line of blood at her hairline where the scar started. She looked for the first time exhausted. General, she said. Captain, I am sorry for the loss of the Hark and Holler. She did not answer for a moment. Ren had a kid, she said. Daughter. She works the lunar shuttles out of Drogheda. I'll tell her myself. I would like to attend the funeral rite, if you will permit it. She blinked at him through the comm. It's a human right, General. I am aware. I'm not sure I will attend, Captain Kestrel, if you will permit it. She looked at him for a long moment, the same reading look. Then she nodded. Tomorrow, she said. Long Patience's main bay. Wear what you wore yesterday. The funeral was unlike anything Vethek had ever attended. The humans gathered in the cargo bay of the Long Patience around a long table draped in a blue cloth. There was no body. There was a flight jacket, a photograph of a younger man laughing, and the woman Vethek had seen welding in the hangar, who turned out to be Ren Polo's sister. The humans did not sing in their funeral. They told stories. One after another they stood and they spoke of Ren Polo, who had been, by their accounts, mediocre at chess and bad at navigation and good at finding work for people who could not get work elsewhere. They told stories until they ran out of stories, and then they sat in silence, and then they ate together. The food was warm and simple, and there was a great deal of it. Vethek did not eat. He was not built for the human stomach. He sat in the corner and listened. At the end, Audra Kestrel came over to him. She did not say anything for a while. She had a cup of the same warm drink as before. "You came," she said finally. "I came. That meant something to my crew, General. I don't know if you knew it would." "I did not," Vethek said. "I came because it was correct." She looked at him. She nodded slowly. Then she said, "You're not what I expected. I am told this often by humans." She laughed then, a short, startled laugh. He had not heard her laugh before. It made the scar at her cheekbone shift in an interesting way. "All right, General Voss Karen," she said. "We have work to do." The work was the storm coil. It took them 3 weeks to build the trap, and the trap was not Vethek's design, and it was not, in the end, Audra's either. The architect was a young council intelligence officer named Pelkavu, who had been a junior analyst on Doruvel's staff, and who had spent the engagement at Suran watching everything on a sensor feed and writing notes, the way a child writes notes in a class he has been waiting his whole life to attend. Pelkavu came to Vethek on the 4th day after Suran with a stack of notes and a diagram. The diagram was a sketch of the engagement, with the dragon's movements traced out across the ring plane in a long looping curve. Pelkavu had marked every place where the dragon school had hesitated, every place where it had veered, every place where it had broken pattern. He had then overlaid the points where council ships and human ships had crossed each other's broadcast signatures. "General," he said, "I think they were not afraid of our ships. I think they were afraid of the humans flying with our ships. The pattern changes when we are mixed. Look, here and here and here." Vethek looked at the diagram for a long time. "Why would they be afraid of humans particularly?" he said. "There are 6 of them and 300 of us." "Because, sir, the humans have killed a great many of them in the past year. I do not think dragons forget." Audra Kestrel, when shown the diagram in turn, looked at it and made a small sound in her throat. "He's right," she said. "I felt it at Suran. They came at us harder. They came at us angrier." "Angrier?" "They knew us, General. The big ones did. They knew the silhouette of a human freighter, and they did not like it." Vethek thought about that for several seconds. "The storm coil," he said. "If she comes, she will come for the humans first." "Yes. Then we will not bring humans to the next engagement." Audra Kestrel looked at him for a long second. "General," she said, "you are going to bring humans to the next engagement. You are going to bring my wing right to the front. Because, if the storm coil is the mind behind these flights, she will not come down for a council line element. She will only come down for me. And I am the only thing in this fleet that will bring her where you can talk to her." "Talk to her. Talk to her, General. Not kill her. Not yet." Vethek's first lung wanted to refuse on principle. The council did not negotiate with predator species. It cataloged them. It contained them. It destroyed them in the rare necessary case. It did not talk to them. His second lung pointed out that the council had thrown 300 warships at the dragons and lost them all in 11 minutes, and that whatever the council usually did was not what was working here. He gave Audra Kestrel a long look. "You are a strange woman, Captain Kestrel," he said. "I have been told this often by council generals," she said. Vethek allowed himself for the second time in his career to laugh. The histories would later call the next stretch the Cold Weeks, and Vethek would remember them as the time the 16th Fleet stopped being a council formation and quietly became something the council had no protocol for. It began with the intelligence problem. The council's central archives had no useful entries for the bioform. The council's military doctrine had no airspace control template for an enemy that entered and left atmosphere under its own power. The council's rules of engagement against an unknown species required a chain of authorizations that began with the Speaker of the Bench and proceeded down through the Ascendant Council, the Permanent Bureau, the Joint Staffs, and finally to a Fleet General's adjutant. Vethek had violated nearly every link in that chain the moment he accepted Audra Kestrel's operational authority inside his line at Suran. He filed his report on the 3rd day of the Cold Weeks. He filed it honestly. He named Audra Kestrel by rank and ship. He named Ren Polo of the Hark and Holler in the casualty list as a council-recognized combatant, which was technically against 4 separate articles of standing law. He requested formal joint operational status for the human convoy. He requested expanded engagement authority. He requested that humanity be provisionally seated on the bench for the duration of the bioform crisis. The reply came back on day 5. By council standards, it was brief. "Your requests are denied. Stand down. Await reinforcement from the 11th and 21st Fleets. ETA 14 stand days. Engage no further until reinforced. Discontinue all human operational contact." Vethek read it twice. He sat at the obsidian table in the heart of Arusa's strategy chamber and looked at the words for a long time. Then he sent for Doruvel and Pelkavu and Maruyel, and he closed the door behind them. I am going to disobey this order, he said. I will not require any of you to disobey it with me. You may transfer at the next available rotation. You will not be marked in my logs. Doruvel folded her thin, pale hands and did not move them. General, she said. What is the order? He told them. When he had finished, Pelkavu, who had not in his career ever raised his voice in a senior officer's presence, opened his notebook on the table and set his fingertip on the first page. I have new analysis from Surin, General. His voice was perfectly steady. The dragons are coordinating across at least 3-star systems. If we wait 14 days, they will reorganize. The pattern I am seeing suggests they intend a coordinated strike on the human inner colonies in approximately 8 standard days. We do not have 14 days, we have 6. With respect, General, standing down is not a viable order. Maruyel cleared her throat. Her white throat had gone, for the first time Vethek could remember, pink at the base. I will not transfer, General. If we are to disobey, I would prefer to be present when it happens. Doruvel did not say anything. She simply nodded once, pulled her own notebook out of her sleeve, and opened it to a clean page. The cold weeks proceeded anyway. They proceeded without authorization, without reinforcement, and without telling the Council. 68 Council ships, 2 surviving Glani squadrons, the Long Patience and her sisters, and a growing roster of human freighters who heard, through the Rim's gossip channels, what was happening at the heart of Arusa, and brought their ships and their dead, and their notebooks and their patched-out hulls to a forming up coordinate in the dark between 2 unmapped stars. By day 7, Vethek had 111 ships at his rendezvous. 43 were human civilians. He had attended 4 funerals by then. He had learned to sit through the storytelling. He had learned the names of every human dead. He had begun slowly in small, careful sips to drink the coffee, the way a man learns a foreign tongue 1 word at a time. On day 9, Hala arrived. She was not yet named Hala. She was a stranger, and she was wounded. The Hark again, Audra's lead freighter, renamed in honor of Ren Polo, picked her up on a stripped-back debris sweep through the Talmir corridor, half dead in the wreckage of a refinery collision. The freighter crew did not at first know what to do. The standing instinct was to put a charge through the eye. The dragon was wounded. The dragon was small, but not safe small. The dragon was, in the Talmir crew's words, the largest thing they had ever pulled out of a debris field that was still breathing. Audra Kestrel was on comm within minutes. She talked the Hark Again's captain, a thick-jawed woman named Shiel Torin, through a careful stabilization procedure that Audra had been developing in her own head, on paper, for 6 months, without ever having had cause to try it. They got the dragon into the cargo bay. They got the wound under medical gel. They kept her sedated for the first day. On the second day, they let her wake. On the third day, they began the long, careful work of feeding her water and showing her they were not going to harm her, and bearing the absolute terror of being in a confined space with a wounded predator who could, if she chose, end them all in a single breath. Vethek visited the Hark again on the 4th day after the capture. He climbed down into the cargo bay through a service ladder, and he stood beside Audra Kestrel, and he looked at the dragon, and the dragon looked at him. She was beautiful. He had not, in his 312 years, used the word for anything except the work of certain painters of his homeworld. He used it now in his head and did not flinch. "She's not eating," Audra said. There were dark circles under her eyes. "She took water from my hand this morning. I do not know if that was trust or thirst. I am trying not to assume. Has she spoken? She has made sounds. Pelkavu thinks they are linguistic. He has been here for 3 days and he has not slept." Vethek looked at the dragon. The dragon looked back. He had the sudden powerful impression of being red. Her eye was the color of a winter sea. It held his own without blinking for what felt like a very long time. Then it closed slowly and opened again, in a gesture Vethek would not understand the meaning of for another 11 years. "Captain Kestrel," he said, "you should give her a name." Audra Kestrel looked at him. Her own eyes were red. "I had a niece," she said. "She was 8. She died in the Talmir refinery fire 7 years ago. Her name was Hala." Vethek nodded. "Then this one is Hala." That was the moment he would write later in his memoir, when the cold weeks ended, and the campaign for the Pillar of Balarn began. They had a captured dragon. They had a name for her. They had a distress cry that Pelkavu was already learning to broadcast. They had a council fleet that was no longer a council fleet, but an unauthorized coalition of 111 ships under a general who was certain to be court-martialed if he survived, and they had the beginning of a plan. The plan was simple in the way Audra's plans tended to be simple. They would broadcast Hala's distress cry from a baited position. The storm coil would come. They would not fire. They would instead give the youngling back. There were arguments. The arguments lasted 36 hours. The chief argument against was that the storm coil was the parade killer at Balarn 6 and could be reasonably expected to incinerate the entire baited position the moment she arrived. The chief argument for was that Pel Kavu was now reasonably certain the storm coil could think, and a thinking creature with a missing child could be reasoned with, possibly by a small unarmed figure standing in an open cargo bay with no weapon and no protection and a soft voice. The volunteer for that role, of course, was Audra Kestrel. Vethek tried twice to make her let him stand in her place. The first time she laughed at him. The second time she did not laugh. She put her hand on his sleeve lightly the way a human did, and she said, "General, the storm coil will not know your face. She knows mine. She has watched my ships for 11 months. If anyone walks out into open vacuum to give her her child back, it has to be the human she has already decided to recognize as the captain of these ships. It has to be me. Do not argue with me on this. I will not be moved." He did not argue. He stood at the side of her hangar on the Long Patience, and he watched her crew check her vacuum suit seals. One more time, and he watched her tie her hair back, and he did not say any of the things he wanted to say, because none of them would have helped. She turned at the airlock and looked at him. "Hold the line, General," she said. "Hold the line, Captain." That was the night before the pillar. The pillar of Balarn was, in another life, a wonder. It was the great vertical formation of ice and rock that rose like a finger out of the equatorial ring of the gas giant Balarn 9, 3,000 kilometers from base to crown, lit on its sunward face by the slow-turning glow of the planet beneath. Council survey teams had visited it once a century. They had taken samples and made paintings and gone home. The pillar had been, until very recently, a place where nothing ever happened. Now it was the place where the largest organized dragonflight in known history had been gathering for 9 standard days, drawn by a sustained civilian band broadcast from a small group of human freighters claiming to be in distress. The broadcast was a lie. The freighters were Audra Kestrel's wing, dressed up to look like a stranded convoy. The distress signal was Pel Kavu's design, pitched to mimic the wing's actual broadcast signature at Surin, and tuned, on Audra's advice, to carry the faint warm rasp of human throat speech that the storm coil had heard once before and remembered. The council line lay along the pillar's dark face, hidden in its shadow. Every reactor at minimum, every drive at cold standby, every weapon ready. 68 line ships, 3 battle carriers, the 2 surviving Glani interceptor squadrons. The heart of Arusa at the center of the formation, with Vethek standing on her bridge and listening to his secondary lung try very gently to claw its way out of his ribs. "Movement," Maruyel said. "Upper atmosphere descending. Multiple signatures. The big one is at the center." "How big?" Vethek said. Yell did not answer for a moment. "General, the big one is the parade killer." He knew. He had known since the broadcast lured the first scouts in on day 3. The storm coil was the same kilometer-winged mass he had watched open the sun promise like a fruit. She had come this time, slowly, as if she wanted to be seen. "Send to Captain Kestrel. Confirm we are go." The reply came back in Audra's voice, hoarse over the comm. "We're go. General, hold your line until I say. Whatever you see, hold your line. We do not fire on the storm coil until I say." "Understood, Captain." "Hold the line." He turned to his bridge crew. They were watching him, every one of them. Some of them were frightened. Some of them, and this was the part that surprised him, were not. "Hold the line," he said. The storm coil descended through the upper rings in a long, unhurried glide. The smaller dragons came down with her, fanning out around her at a respectful distance. Vethek counted them, 43. He did not see how Audra and 6 freighters proposed to handle them. He learned in the next 4 minutes. Audra's wing did not flee. That was the first thing. They held position at the heart of the trap, exactly where the broadcast said they were, and they let the dragonflight close around them. The Long Patience, the Glory Bee, the Two-Tone, the Walker, the Ashen Hope, and the new lead, the captured freighter renamed Hark again, held station and waited. The smaller dragons closed first. They came in low and fast, the way they had come at Surin. They were not this time trying to kill on the first pass. They were trying to herd. Audra's notes had warned of this. The larger flights, she had said, sometimes worked sheepdog patterns when they thought they had cornered prey. She had said this meant the storm coil intended to take the freighters alive. Vethek's tactical officers heard her say it over the open channel and did not at first understand. Why would a dragon take prey alive? The council had no doctrine for that question. The storm coil arrived at the heart of the trap. She was, Vethek would write later in his report, struggling for the words, beautiful. There was no other word that fit. Her hide was a deep blue black, marked along the spine with a long sweeping pattern of paler scales that caught the planetary glow and turned it into a slow secondary light. Her crest rose 300 meters above her brow. Her eyes were the size of city districts, and they were intelligent. Vethek could feel the intelligence from across the engagement range. It was not the intelligence of a wolf or a school of fish. It was the intelligence of a person who had survived a great deal and learned a great deal, and was at the moment very tired and very angry. The storm coil came to a hover above the long patience. Audra Kestrel's voice came over the open council channel. It was being broadcast on every frequency the wing could reach, in every language Audra spoke, in the simple flat cadence of someone trying very hard to be understood by something that did not share their tongue. My name is Audra, she said. I am the captain of these ships. I want to talk. I am not going to shoot you. Please do not eat us. The smaller dragons paused in their herding pattern. The storm coil tilted her head. I have something of yours, Audra said. I think it is yours. I am going to bring her up now. Please do not eat us, please. Vethek's tactical feed lit. The Hark again was opening its main cargo bay. From within the bay, slowly on lift cables, a captured young dragon emerged into open vacuum. She was, Vethek estimated, 20 meters at the wingspan. Deep dark blue along the spine, with the same pale scale pattern as the storm coil, but smaller, less developed. The long gash across her left flank was crudely patched with medical gel. Her eyes, when they opened, were the same size as a council officer's head, and they were the same color as the storm coil's eyes. The youngling Hala emerged from the cargo bay, hung there on the lift cables, and saw her mother. She made a sound. The sound was small. It was the sound of a child who had been alone too long and had found that she was not alone after all. It was not a human sound, and it was not an Russian sound. It was, Vethek thought, simply a child's sound, and it crossed every species line he had been taught. The storm coil descended. The council line tensed. Every officer on every bridge had his hand somewhere very close to a firing key. Vethek could hear his own bridge crew breathing. He could hear the small, sharp click of Maruyel's third claw against her console. Hold the line, he said. Hold the line. Hold the line. His first lung wanted to scream the order to fire. The first lung had watched the sun promise come apart at the parade. The first lung remembered the names of 61 captains. The first lung wanted vengeance, and it wanted it now, and it knew exactly where to aim it. His second lung sat against his ribs and watched the storm coil lower her enormous head toward her child and was still and did not move. He sided, for the first time in his career, with the second. Hold the line. The storm coil came to a slow halt 300 meters above the Hark again. She lowered her enormous head to her child. Her child reached up. Their snouts touched. A small sound went through the open council channel. Vethek did not at first identify it. Then he did. It was Maruyel weeping very quietly at her console. He did not look at her. He let her have it. Audra Kestrel walked out into the open hangar of the Hark again. She wore a flight suit. She did not wear armor. She did not carry a weapon. She walked out to the edge of the open cargo bay, and she stood there in her vacuum suit with her boots on the deck plate, and she looked up at the storm coil's enormous eye, and she lifted one gloved hand in the human gesture of greeting. Hi, she said. Her voice was very small over the comm. She's yours then, I thought so. We tried to take care of her. I am sorry we couldn't fix her flank better. I'm sorry your kind have been dying. I'm sorry mine have been killing yours. I think we have been very stupid, both of us. I would like to stop, if you would like to stop. The storm coil regarded her. There was a long silence on every bridge in the engagement. Vethek could hear his own heart. Both of his hearts. He had two. They did not in that moment disagree. The storm coil lowered her head to the deck plate of the Hark again, slowly, carefully. The plate could not bear her weight, and she did not put it on the plate. She brought her snout to within 5 meters of Audra Kestrel, and she held it there, and she breathed out, and a slow warm wind moved across the deck. It was not flame, it was breath. The breath of a thing that had decided, perhaps just at that moment, that it would not flame this particular small human. Audra Kestrel reached out her gloved hand and laid it on the storm coil's lower lip. Thank you, she said. The storm coil made a sound then. It was low and long, and it carried on the open comm like the slow tolling of a great bell underwater. Pelkavu's voice came on the analyst channel, hushed, almost reverent. She is General. She is naming the human. I think she is naming her. Naming her what? I do not know the word yet. I will know it. I think it is. I think it is something like the one who returned. The storm coil rose slowly and took her child onto her back and turned and began the long, unhurried climb back up into the rings. Her flight followed her. 43 smaller dragons banked and rose in her wake. But the storm coil did not go all the way up. Halfway up, she stopped. She turned in the slow ring gas, the long sweep of her wing, throwing a shadow across half the council line, and she brought her enormous head around until she was looking directly at the heart of Arusa. Vethek felt every hand on his bridge tense. Hold, he said. The storm coil held his gaze through a kilometer of vacuum and the polished armor glass of his observation balcony. He had the powerful, unmistakable impression, the third time he had felt it now, and the strongest, of being read. Read by an intelligence older than the council bench, older than his own 3 centuries, older perhaps than the world the council had been built on. He did not look away. He stood at his viewport, and he met the storm coil's eye, and he did the only thing his second lung would let him do. He lowered his head, the shallowest possible inclination, the Russian gesture for I see you and I name you, not pray. The storm coil held the look for one more long moment. Then, very slowly, she lowered her own head in return. Then she was gone, climbing up through the rings, her flight closing in around her like the closing of a great hand, and the engagement range was empty, and the pillar of Balarn stood quiet again in the slow glow of the planet beneath. The council line had not fired a single shot. Vethek stood on his bridge for several minutes after that and did not say anything. It was Doruvel who broke the silence eventually. General, she said, orders? He took a breath. His secondary lung had unclenched a long time ago, he realized, and he had not noticed. Send to the council, he said. Engagement at Balarnine concluded. No casualties on either side. Subject species, I am rendering it as dragon, has been confirmed sapient. Recommend immediate diplomatic protocol and the opening of formal contact procedures. General, council policy does not permit the opening of formal contact procedures with. Council policy will be amended, Vethek said, by me, in the report I will write tonight, with the support of Captain Audra Kestrel of the Human Civilian Convoy Long Patience. Append her name to the report. Append the names of every human ship and every human pilot who participated in the engagement. Append the names of the human dead by name with the full honors of council recognition. Doruvel made a small sound, the sound of a Kasseron trying not to weep. He had not known Kasserons wept. Yes, General. He keyed his personal channel to the Long Patience. Captain Kestrel. Audra's face came on screen. She was crying. She had not, he thought, noticed yet. There were thin lines down her cheeks where tears had cut tracks through the dust of her flight deck. General, you will permit me to come aboard. I will. Yes, I will. He went. He took only Doruvel and Pelkavu with him. The shuttle ride was 8 minutes again, and he spent them looking at the Long Patience's hull and counting the patches. There were 43. The number had not changed. Several new charge bloom burns had appeared along the upper strake, but the ship was still flying, and that was what counted. Audra Kestrel met them in the same hangar. She had washed her face. She was wearing the same patched jacket. She offered him coffee. He took it again. He did not this time refuse to drink. He drank. It was, he found, terrible. It was also the most important thing he had ever tasted. You walked out into open vacuum to talk to a dragon, he said. I did. Why? She looked at him for a long moment. Because someone had to, and I had her child, and because I have a daughter. She is 14. She is on Drogheda. I thought about my daughter, and I thought about Hala, and I thought about Hala's mother, and I decided I could not, in any conscience I would still have in the morning, put a charge through that young thing's eye. So I climbed down into the bay, and I fed her water, and I did the work, and when the time came I walked out and I said hello. It was not brave. It was the only thing I could think of that did not feel like burying another friend. He listened. I have been a soldier for 312 standard years, Captain Kestrel. I have not, in those 312 years, ever stood in front of a sapient and asked it not to eat me. I am not sure I would have known how. You would have, General. You walked into my hangar and you sat at my table and you drank my coffee, and you came to Renpolo's funeral. You would have done it. He did not answer her then. He drank another sip. He thought he might eventually acquire the taste. The council session in which he presented his report ran for 11 days. There were objections. There were procedural challenges. There were 3 motions to suppress the report. and one motion to court-martial him for unauthorized contact with a non-treaty species. He spent the 11 days standing at the long marble lectern in the council hall on Asfer, answering every question that was asked, including the ones from the gallery of unseated species, including the human delegate who sat in the observer ring with her arms folded and watched him say her people's names into the official record one after another. On the 8th day, he was asked by the Speaker of the Ascendant Bench why he had brought a human freighter captain to a council fleet engagement against an unknown species. Because, Speaker, Vethek said, she was the only person in the engagement range who had been doing the work of survival against this species for 11 months, and the council had not been. We owed her a place in the fight because we had not been there to fight it ourselves. I made the determination that this was the correct answer. I make that determination still, and you stand by the recommendation that humanity be granted a council seat. I stand by it, Speaker. With every honor I have earned in 312 years of service, I stand by it. The Speaker, an old Mendaran with eyes the color of cold metal, looked at him for a long time. Then she inclined her head, the smallest possible gesture, and called for the next question. The motion to seat humanity passed on the 11th day by a margin of 9 votes. It was the closest seating vote in council history. It would, Vethek learned afterward, have failed by 20 if the human dead at Surin had not been read into the record. He filed his retirement papers a week later. He did not, in the end, retire. Audra Kestrel came to find him in his office on Asfer on the morning his papers were due to be processed. She walked in past 3 astonished aides and a council guard who recognized her face from the engagement reports and let her through without challenge. She sat down on the other side of his desk and put her cup of coffee on it. "You're not retiring," she said. "I am, Captain. You're not. You're going to be the first commander of the Joint Council Human Draconian Frontier Service. We've already got the charter drafted. We need a name on it. The Storm Coil, she's communicating now. Did you know that? We've got 3 weeks of contact already. She has a name for herself. We can't pronounce it, but we're trying." He looked at her. "Captain Kestrel, I am very old. You are. You're also the only person in the council who walked into the trap at Balarn 9 and held his line, General. The Storm Coil saw you. She knows you. She has asked, through the contact team, for the name of the council general who did not fire on her child." He was quiet for a long moment. "I see. You'll do it." He took a small sip of the coffee on her side of the desk. It had not become any less of an acquired taste. He had, perhaps, acquired it a little more. "I will do it if you fly the lead freighter. I was going to anyway." He laughed then. "The 3rd time in a career. All right, Captain Kestrel, we have work to do." Hala, the captured youngling, grew into her adult coil over the next 11 years. She was the first dragon any non-dragon had ever spoken to in casual conversation. She learned to render her snout sounds into council standard through a vocoder she helped Pelkavu design. She was, by all accounts, a person of dry humor and patient temper. She was fond of Audra Kestrel, whom she called in her own tongue the small warm hand. She came to visit Vethek twice a standard year at his office on the Frontier Service flagship, a new design, a long quiet hull called the Pillar of Balarn, and the two of them would sit in his cabin and look out at the slow-turning planet below and not say very much. On one such visit late in his life, when the Frontier Service was a settled thing and the human council seat was a fact taught to school children, and the joint patrols of council-line ships and dragon flights and human freighters were the calm fact of the rim, Hala turned her great young head toward him and asked him a question. "You did not fire," she said. The vocoder rendered her voice as a low, warm bell. "At Balarn 9, when my mother came down, you did not fire." "Why?" He considered the question for a long time. "Because a freighter captain," he said, "had told me to hold the line, and because I had attended the funeral of one of her people, and because I had begun, perhaps too late in my career, to listen." Hala blinked her enormous eye at him. In Hala's people, the blink was a gesture of attention and respect. "My mother says," she said, "that you were the first general she ever met who did not look like prey. That is a kind thing to say. It was not meant as a kindness. It was meant as a measurement. I will accept it as both." She inclined her head. They sat in silence for a while. Outside the long viewport, the planet turned, and the rings caught the slow glow, and far above them, where the Pillar of Balarn rose like a finger out of the equatorial ice, 3 young dragons and a human freighter and a Glani interceptor were running a joint patrol pattern that none of their grandparents would have believed possible. Vethek Vas Karan of the Council's 16th Fleet, now of the Joint Frontier Service, watched them for a long time and did not say anything, and was content. He had begun the war believing the dragons were a thing to be killed. He had ended it believing they were a people to be known. The journey between those two beliefs had been the great work of his life. It had been led, every step of the way, by a human freighter captain who had walked unarmed into open vacuum and told a kilometer-winged sapient that she was sorry and had been believed. There were worse things to have lived for. There were worse things, he thought, to have lived to see. Outside, the patrol turned in its long, calm arc, and the planet turned, and the rings caught the light, and Vethek closed his second lung gently around his first, and breathed and was still.